Okay, friends, welcome back. Today we'll go through another gambit that can be played against a d4 player. Last time round we covered the England gambit. This time round we will cover something called the Budapest gambit. So let's get started. So d4, a normal looking knight to f6, c4. If you are a Queen's Gambit player, you'll probably play this. So the move here is e5. The approach is pretty similar. You just like the England Gambit, you capture the central pawn, and the opponent typically has. So we'll cover two lines here, which the opponent will employ. One is the knight to g4, and the other is the knight to e4. So let's cover knight to g4 option first. Once the knight jumps to g4, it automatically starts attacking this e4 pawn. And it's important to know that we need to start now by defending with this pawn with the bishop. So the bishop to f4 defends the pawn. Knight to c6 attacks the pawn again on e4. Sorry, on e5. We will again defend it with knight to f3, right? And then the opponent can play something like a bishop to b4, putting a check, right? So what we need to do is play the knight up, very common looking move. Let him take with the bishop, take back with the pawn, and then uh, he adds another attacker to this e5 pawn. So now it has been attacked by knights and the queen. You push the queen up, defend this pawn, right? And now the only move that black has at this point in time is to play f6. If black does not play f6, plays something else, for example, goes and plays castling, for example, you can quickly see the evaluation bar is giving us a huge advantage. That is because we can start displacing this knight now by playing something like h3. The knight has nowhere to go but it has to go somewhere in this weak square here. And then you can start by you can take this, you can start pushing this pawn, you can get yourself castled, and you will have a good game from here. So you have now tackled, in case he does not play this f6 move here, he doesn't come with this f6 move here, you've already had outside the gambit lines with a huge advantage. The other line that black can try here is queen to a3. What it starts attacking is this pawn. What you need to do is to defend by this rook, even though this gives away this pawn here, right? And once it takes this pawn, you are almost a piece up. It gives you an advantage of 2.9. You play h3, displace the knight to a very weak square, then play e4. You see this e4 now controls this square, so the knight can't even come here, right? So knight does not have any good jump square right now. So what it has to do then is to retreat back, which gives you an even bigger advantage. And then you open up the center by playing something like c5. What it does is that it attacks the queen here, so you're forcing the queen to take. Once the queen takes, you can take back with the pawn, and you have these three super advanced uh, central pawns here, which kind of displaces this knight. Also, the knight has to move somewhere in a very passive square like this. Then you can start playing your bishop up, you can start getting castled, and you have a very good position as white, because all of black's pieces here are stuck in the last rank. So you're way ahead in your development, and you will very quickly start seeing the results on the board. Like, you will start winning pieces, you will have a much more attacking game than your opponent, and so on and so forth. And in case the queen moves somewhere here, does not want to exchange with your queen, you can play the bishop here and start attacking this pawn, right? And it's almost not defendable. If you try to defend it with your knight here, the bishop can take the knight, and then you can take this pawn here. So now let's go to the main move, which is f6, which is almost forced here. So now you can't play h3, because then they can take here, attack your bishop, So if you take the knight, they will attack, they will take the bishop, and they have actually recovered their pawn. So f6 is almost forced, and what you do here is, uh, right now, before he played f6, you have two double pawns, right here and right here, right? So you're solving one of them. So you take this off, you take this off, and now this knight attacks this queen, so you just retreat, right? So you're a clear pawn up. There is no compensation that black has in this position. So if black plays the most accurate way, you're still, you can retain your pawn and you can have a good game. If he plays inaccurately, like we showed in the earlier lines, you can have an even bigger advantage. So remember this h3 opportunity. In case you get this opportunity to play h3, take that, displace the knight, and then you will have an even better game. Let us see some variations that can happen. So, for example, after this, book move is to play knight to c6. However, he can give you a check here. So what do we do if he gives a check here? Simple. Just like it happened in move number 5 earlier, when the bishop gave a check on b4. You played knight to c3. The same move will appear here. You take, he takes, and then it's just there is a little bit of a move order difference, but it's the same thing, the same response. So you play knight to f3 once he plays knight to c6, and so on and so forth. If he goes ahead and plays something like this, you can go ahead and play something like this, and you will have a very similar kind of a game. So now, instead of knight to c6, if he plays queen to e7, what do we do in that case, right? This is a little tricky. So you play knight to c3 here, right? And you may think that you know what now? Black has two attackers on this pawn. He can take this, right? So let's let him try. Like, so say black takes on e5. A simple move here is knight to d5, and you will slowly realize that this knight is gone. So the way to defend is, the only way to defend, or a couple of ways maybe to defend this, right? First is if you just move the queen. So the queen was attacked, so you move the queen, but now this leads to the mother of all forks. So you will lose the queen, right? The other way to defend this is here, but then you will lose your queen directly. So the only legitimate move at this point in time is queen to d6. But even that does not work because you play c5. And once you give away the defense of this knight, so the queen has to go somewhere, right? So the queen, say, takes the pawn, then you can take the knight. So now the other thing that can happen, say now we are in the same line, so knight to g4, bishop to f4, knight to c6, knight to f3. Now instead of bishop to b4 check, what happens if he gives a bishop to c5? Comes bishop to c5, attacking this pawn, right? Whenever this happens, it's a very standard move. Don't try to defend it with your bishop. Play something like e3. Why e3? Because it releases this bishop as well, and at some point in time you want to place this bishop here and get cancelled. Right? So now again going ahead. So now the same move order, right? Okay. Instead of taking here, if the opponent plays queen to e7, we do a simple thing. We just move our bishop, move our rook here, because we want to avoid the double pawns here. So even if he wants to take this pawn now, the e5 pawn now, he's okay to take it, right? But there is a terrible threat of rook to e3, putting this under pressure. So even though, like, now the pawns have been equalized, first we don't have these double pawns which we typically have on the c5, and our rook is terribly our rook is very active. So it can come here, start pressuring this. If you move this, you'll lose the queen. So if you want to move the queen, it's still under attack because and still pinned because behind it is the king, right? So things that can happen in the line in which the opponent plays knight to uh, g4 instead of knight to e4. So this is one line that I wanted to cover that the opponent can play. The other line that the opponent can play is knight to c4. What to do here, right? So what did we do earlier? We brought our bishop out and we defended this pawn first, right? Now in this case, our pawn is not attacked, right? So we will go ahead and play knight to f3, right? Since our pawn is not attacked, we can play the knight to f3 move, and we have already defended this pawn. So a double attack on this pawn is not coming right now. We wanted to bring the f4, play bishop to f4 first, because with knight to g4, there is a potential of a double attack on this pawn very quickly. Say here, if the opponent plays something like this, right, and you try to defend by playing the knight up here. The opponent can play something like this, and now this pawn is attacked twice, right? So the only way to defend it properly is playing this uh, pawn up. But now your bishop is trapped, right, behind this pawn. And just because we want to avoid that, in the previous line, uh, we played bishop to f4 plus first, protect the pawn with the bishop, and if the bishop then came here, you can play uh, the pawn up to e3, and now the bishop is outside this pawn chain. It is much more active. It is not behind this pawn chain. So in this line, we don't play this bishop move here because we don't need it to be here. Because if you see, this pawn is not even attacked at this point in time. So if the opponent plays something like this, attacking this pawn, we simply play e3. This pawn is not even attacked once here, so we don't need the bishop here at this point in time. So now say he starts attacking this, right? So he starts putting pressure on this. We still have a defender, so he still can't take it. So you play a simple move like a3 here, okay? And what it does, it has the potential. First of all, your bishop can't come here, which was the best move for the bishop earlier. If the opponent thinks about attacking this pawn once more, which can happen, and queen to e7 is one of the most natural moves in the Budapest Gambit. You play something like this, and if you see, this bishop is trapped basically. It's not almost, it's trapped. If you can't go here because I just take, you can't go here because I push this, and you're trapped, right? So so this is what happens if the opponent is too greedy to grab this pawn, especially in a position where he plays knight to e4 instead of knight to g4. You don't need the bishop to be on f4. You can keep the bishop here, you can expand, you can put the bishop here, and then the bishop is in an even more dangerous diagonal and does a dual duty of attacking the king side as well as defending this pawn. So bishop to b4 is not the best move here. Bishop to b5 is. And then the defense is to simply put the knight in front. If now he's starting to put some pressure on this pawn, but it is already defended, you don't need anything. So you start pressuring the bishop here, forcing white to take here, right? Forcing black to take here. You take back with the bishop, take back with the bishop, queen takes back. Now the double pressure on the pawn comes, so you play something like queen to c3, and this is, you have retained your pawn. You're in a pretty good situation in terms of development. Uh, your rook can come to d file very easily. People who are a little more advanced, black's idea will be to double up on the e file to attack this pawn the third time onwards, and you need to figure out how to defend this pawn or counter threat something else in order to like defend this pawn indirectly. So the best move in this position, just for the advanced people who have figured the lines till this point, is to play rook to d1, right? So the idea is to attack this pawn, push the knight rook here and defend this pawn, uh, and indirectly, save this pawn from being taken, right? So keep this in mind and explore some lines if you have figured it out and mastered moves till this point in time. So this is where I will probably stop. So we have covered two basic threads, in the Budapest Gambit, right? And that's where I will leave you at. The lines that I provided you here in this video, you will never get in a situation where you will face that smothered bit. So keep that in mind and try to learn the lines that I just showed. I think you will be more often than not at a good spot if the opponent plays the Budapest Gambit against you.